night, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Dialogue with the Diaspora. I'm your host, Diane Haylock. In tonight's episode, I will be talking to a member of the diaspora who is committed to preserving our rich culture and heritage. He does not miss any opportunity to document an important event or interview with a Belizean artist, athlete, politician, and other Belizeans who are making their mark at home and abroad. Over the years, he has compiled an invaluable collection of videos, pictures, writings, and more on Belizean personalities, holidays, and other important cultural events. He is a trained broadcast journalist. It is my pleasure to welcome my friend, Bilal Morris, to tonight's show. Good evening, Bilal.
Greetings, Diane. It's such a pleasure to meet you after so many years again.
Yes, it's been a long, long time, and we could take them way, way back to the classroom.
Oh, yes. Way back then, I tell you the story of that here.
Yes.
I told people the story of that here like need volumes, man.
Tell me, Bilal, how are you? How are you doing, especially in these times?
I know, these challenging COVID times. I'm well,
Yes.
Diane, hanging in there. And doing pretty well so far.
Yes.
You know, thank goodness for everything, and family and friends. And
The family is doing well?
Family is doing well. We're doing well,
Right.
very much so. And I'm always very excited to know that I'm a child of Belize, and I'm so very much honored all the time. Though I live in the Belizean diaspora,
Right.
Belize is closest to me as my jugular vein.
Well, you know, I'm really eager to talk with you this evening and to hear what you have actually been up to. But first, like I always do, I take my guests back to that place where they started from, their roots in Belize. Tell us about yours.
Well, as you know, I grew up in Belize as a youngster, very much sort of enthusiastic and excited about my Belizean culture, people. Ever since as a boy, I was very thrilled with the excitement of the Belizean vibrancy, its culture, its people. And I wrote from then. I was always writing and very much taking stories. I love stories. And there were so many stories in my childhood. I grew up going to Anglican primary schools, St. John's Primary School, and I later on went to St. Michael's College, where my high school life began. That's where I had met you as a teacher, Diane. You were one of our educators. And I have written so much about my educators. Just recently, Miss Satchell, who was so dear to me in terms of the person who actually helped me to find myself in the English language, as I put it. It's sort of an identity, you know, who am I? What am I about to do? What is my purpose? And from there on, after high school, I worked in Belize at the audit department for a couple of years. And then I migrated to the United States, where I sought higher education.
When was that? When did you actually migrate?
I migrated in 1981. Just before
independence.
The Heads of Agreement. Yeah, just
before the Heads of Agreement.
I migrated during the Heads of Agreement, actually, April 5th. And I never forget a very important thing when I was at the audit department before my migration. I was to leave the Sunday, and the Dingle Lumumba came to the audit department and shut it down. Right? And I never forget that moment, present there, seeing this figure, this personality. And I migrated out of Belize in 1981. My parents were migrants to the United States, economic refugees, as my good friend Dr. Jerome Strachan would say, that the Belizeans who left Belize were economic refugees. We didn't leave for wars and so forth, like the Central American republics, but we left seeking a better life. Some of us left seeking a better education, right, in terms of going to school and trying to further ourselves and so forth.
And don't forget, because it's an important part of the narrative, there was also political victimization that caused people during that era to leave as well.
Very much so. I just draw the attention to that. I was interviewing Roddy Leslie, awesome Queen's Park Rangers football player. And I was like, this man was also the brother of Kenrick Leslie, Dr. Kenrick Leslie. And I was like, ask him off the record, why did someone like you left? I mean, you are like a gem. And the whole political story comes up in terms of that. But if you interview a lot of Belizeans get a cross section of why a lot of Belizeans left, these were educated, highly intelligent, brilliant minds. And they would tell you because of the political situation at the time, the whole George Caleb Price government ruled that country for 30 years. And the opposition party had never got a chance to win an election, closest in 1979. A lot of these people were victimized. There was a great victimization process going on. I mean, talking about Radio Belize and the pressure that CLB Rogers, as the Minister of Home Affairs, placed on censorship and so forth and so on. We do not look at this as looking at George Caleb Price as a horrible leader or a bad leader, but no, within this great figure, this outstanding political statesman that has an international stature, there are also the whole aspect of victimization within his government. And a lot of Belizeans, we're talking about BTC, Belize Technical College, which was one of the most outstanding and phenomenal Belizean institutions that would have become Belize's university. There was a lot of attack on a lot of those educators and people that were there. And so a lot of these people countrywide left the country, and you hear their stories, and I'm one that document their stories, that the reason why they left was because of the heavy political victimization, that they were on the other side, the opposition side. These were the people who rallied with Philip Wilberforce Goldson's and National Independence Party. And these were the people who opposed. Of course, in a government, you should have a strong opposition. And so these were the people who left, and there was a tremendous amount of brain drain. But before that, we have the 1961 hurricane that played a tremendous role in the migration of Belizeans abroad. Long before the George Caleb Price's, the Price government and the premiership of George Caleb Price, you had 1961 hurricane that played a tremendous role. Impact in terms of that hurricane devastated that country, and a lot of people left. The United States government.
It basically destroyed Belize City as the capital of the country, at the time. Ergo, a Belmopan came about. Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah. And a lot of Belizeans left during that time. The United States government had offered visas for Belizeans to leave, to go to the United States to help build back Belize in a way. So the diaspora, the impact of the Belizean diaspora can go way back, as far as you may say, in terms of how it helped in the development of the country. And so those Belizeans in leaving, they were able to start off by sending the remittances and helping their folks back home rebuild back again. They played a tremendous part in the rebuilding of Belize after the 1961 hurricane, yes indeed. And we can go further back, as we know the foremost scholar on Belizeans in the diaspora is Dr. Jerome Strawn, and I collaborate with him a lot in terms of how far does Belizean immigration goes, and he would say as far back as the 1800s, and he'd cite Lyons, Mr. Lyons, Dr. Lyons from the Methodist Church of Belize, who went and was the Belizean ambassador to Liberia, the U.S. ambassador to Liberia, Ernest Lyons. So Belizean migration stemmed all the way back from the 1800s, and we talk about Ernest Lyons, who later on became the United States ambassador to Liberia.
So he was Belizean, migrated to the U.S., became an American citizen. And then ultimately represented that country then as their ambassador in Liberia. That's an interesting, a new bit of historical information for me. I had never heard about him before.
Ernest Lyons. We heard about Lyons Bakery. Remember the Lyons Bakery?
Yes, indeed. Okay.
He comes from that same family structure.
That same family. Okay, good.
Yes.
Bilal, I know that since you left Well, I want to suggest that you never really left Belize. That you've been back many times. In fact, there was a period where I recall that you came back to actually stay for multiple years. Talk a bit about that, about your ongoing relationship then with home, with Belize. How do you?
As you know, Diane, we were passionately involved in the development or in the sort of looking at helping what we can do for Belize. Those of us who uh, share that consciousness in terms of what can we do to help Belize, and my getting involved with organization BREDA, which means the acronym is the Belize Rural Economic Development of Agriculture Through Alliance, BREDA. And we had a lot of alliance with SPARE that you were involved with.
Yes,
The
indeed.
Society for the Promotion of Education and Research. I mentioned SPARE to a lot of students today, Belizean students, and they have no idea. They said,
No,
yes, I
yeah.
see the books, I know their work, but they never know the history of SPARE as one of those dynamic popular education organization that came out of Belize. So we had that passion, and there was a great enlightenment in the 80s in between Belize and the Belizean diaspora. And that for me sparked off the whole interest in terms of wanting to go back home to Belize. After you have completed your studies, after you have done grassroots organizing, which Breda was doing a lot here in the Los
Tell us
Angeles
a bit about
area.
some of those people, Bilal. Just, drop some names
Yeah,
there so
very,
our
very.
audience can get to know those of you who were part of that consciousness movement.
Yes, in Breda itself, we had our chairman, Nuri Akbar. A lot of people know him as Derek Estrada. Nuri Akbar was our chairman. And by the way, he said to tell you hello, Diane. He said to give you the greetings for him, so you were very good to him. And also we had people like Edgar H. Richardson, who was also a youth batter. The organization was a pioneer. It was the brainchild of Ishmael Omar Shabazz, who was also the secretary of United Black Association for Development, UBAD. And Shabazz got a group of us together in 1983, myself and Nuri Akbar. We started out with the Los Angeles Muslims of Belize, and we started a newspaper called Belizean Focus. And that newspaper was dealt with all Belizean news and information and issues confronting Belizeans in the Los Angeles area, as well as we would champion issues in New York and Chicago and Miami, Houston, and so forth areas where Belizeans reside. We then later on moved from the Los Angeles Muslims of Belize with the Belizean focus to Breda. And along came this very astute Belizean statesman, Bert Tucker. And at the time, he was doing a lot of work in Southern Africa with SWAPO. And he brought to us a professor, Ron Wilkins, who was a board member of KPFK. He gave us a chance to have sat on the board and got a radio show called the Belize Caribbean Pulse that Spear and many of the
Yes,
political figures was
I
able to.
remember being on it.
Very much so, very much so. You not only was in that, but we had great forums and town halls for Spare,
That's right,
right? Where
that's
you were
right.
very, very prominent
Yes,
with Asad
yes.
Schumann and Wilfred Sediel,
Wilfred
and
Ellerington, yes,
very much
indeed.
so.
Yeah, yeah.
We hosted many political figures from the People's United Party, George Cable Price government. We hosted the Manuel Esquivel government of 1984 on that radio station. The Prime Minister, the three-time Prime Minister of Belize, Dean Oliver Barrow, was also one of our guests on Belize Caribbean Pulse. And we did tremendous work in terms of holding alliances with grassroots organizations that was in the Los Angeles area that was struggling for the same sort of self-consciousness, of sort of trying to build countries back home, trying to make an impact on development, trying to make an impact on the political situation in their countries. and stuff like that. We Chicano movements, Haitian. We were the first to interview President Aristide before he even became the president of Haiti.
Ah,
We
okay.
interviewed President Aristide before he even became the president of Haiti. So we were very much globally involved. We were Belizeans who had a local or sort of a perspective to help our country, our home country, but we are also building alliance with all these international organizations. We interviewed Don Rojas from the New Jewel movement of President Maurice Bishop, and countless of figures. And as you know, Nur Muhammad had came into Los Angeles, and we were so happy for that because he became a host of that show, Belize Caribbean Pulse, and he did a fantastic and amazing job in terms of all these people that you're talking about. He was able to be the person, the Belizean, who was able to handle these very, very, very dynamic and in-depth interviews. The work was so vast in terms of what we did. We had an agricultural project in the Motamara village that we were trying to see if we can get sort of do sort of intervention work in terms of the Belizean youth, which today is a marginalized and disenfranchised, especially the Black Belizean youth. And so Shabazz had this perspective about land, that land is the center of everything in terms of Belize, and that we must look at the land as a way of independence, because though we had constitutional independence from Britain, our people were still not very much independent in terms of doing for self, sort of holding on to their land, building farms, and being self-sufficient in food. We, we, we were big in the support of that. We may not have really developed a pilot project, agricultural project in the Motamara village, but we were supporting financially and otherwise all these Belizean organizations, cooperatives, and so forth that was moving in that direction in terms of setting up farming cooperatives and producing food for themselves so that they can be independent of the pressures of the economic problems that our country was facing.
Bilal, I want you to take us back a bit to your own journey. You document so well the journey of all of us. But your own journey, leaving Belize to go to the U.S., what did you do with yourself? What, education-wise, career-wise, and so forth?
Yeah, I obtained a degree in broadcast journalism. I love stories. I love to tell stories. And I developed the skill before I even got a degree in broadcast journalism. I was already working on KPFK, doing programs, doing radio for like 10 years before that. I just love the aspect of telling the story of someone else. And Belize became my camera in a way, my lens. And I was able to document a lot of the stories through my journalism, writing stories from the Belizean Focus newspaper. I was the editor. There were times where I wrote the whole paper. I love going out and documenting Belizean history, its culture, its music, its politics, its sports. And it was just a forte that was my forte. It's just something that I had the passion from as a kid. I just love telling stories. And when I had the opportunity to document my own Belizean history, culture, music, I passionately just went into it. I developed today a program called Belizean Legends that I have sort of taken off from the sort of a spring off from what I used to do with organizations and with the radio stations and with my radio programs and so forth that I produced. And now it's a way now for me to have been able to document all these sports figures all these musical figures, all these political and historical figures. And I am passionately doing that right now. And
So
Belizean
what was
legend,
that little moment, that catalyst, that seed that actually got you started on this particular journey?
the catalyst that really got me started on the journey to telling these stories was the passion and the love I have for Belize. I very much felt that we were seen in the world. We were beginning to start seeing in the world in a sort of a very negative image. Um, and I believe that we were better than what was perceived with the arrival of digital media, with the arrival of social media, and that there was had to be someone who would come and put a clean glass next to that so-called dirty glass that was projected. There was a lot of misconceptions about Belizean culture, about Belize, about its people. A lot of misconceptions that had to be corrected. And I felt that I need to be the one who, if I could use my skill, my art to correct that. I embraced that because I wanted to give to the world a better concept, better perception of who really was, because a lot of the things that was coming out of our country was not necessarily
Exactly.
what we were and not necessarily who we were. We were a better people than that. And that's why I go way back into, I'm very nostalgic. I sort of bring all the stories and history of the dynamism and the beauty of what Belize was, its people, its cultures, even in its politics, the dynamic historical aspects of our politics.
But the
Of
fundamental issue there, Bilal, is that our stories were not being told by us. It was
our stories, indeed, that
everybody else telling the
everybody
story,
else, that I had to go
creating, fabricating
fabricate
stories about
stories
us even, you know?
and all,
So,
these false information that was coming
yeah.
out, and that many of us, or people itself, were not even educated about the history, or people are very ignorant. Not a lot of them, but I would say most of the masses of the Belizean people did not know what they have. And I found this, Dan, because I was a social studies teacher at EPR, and in 2001, and I did this because I wanted to transfer a body of knowledge that I got as a Belizean that had to go find out for myself about my country and its people. And so I went to teach because I wanted to transfer this body of knowledge. Bertok always talk about the transfer of knowledge to expatriate nationals. And I asked most of from my first farm classes all the way to the fourth farm, I was preparing fourth farm for CXC. Who are your leaders? Do you know your constitution? Do you know who's the anthem, who wrote the anthem that you get up and use? And they didn't know. They didn't know. And so a wide cross section, and I asked my principal at the time, this social studies syllabus needs to be revolutionized. Our students just don't know about their culture. And I remember finding the history of Samuel Haynes in a book written by a Jamaican sociologist, Winston James. The book was called Raising High the Banner of Ethiopia, Caribbean Radicalism in the 20th Century. And a Jamaican, he's saying that this one here, this was the ardent Pan-Africans, not C. Elgar James, nothing. Said this one here. And he said in the book, he wrote their anthem, but the Belizeans don't even know who they have in this man. A Garveyite, a 1920 black nationalist, a man that was an internationalist in his perspective. So I taught that to my students, and they put that in their SBAs, and most of my students passed CXC with with high grade, with a 1. But I brought a body of knowledge that I felt that my people needed to know, especially young people coming up, that we were never taught our history. And therefore we are now rewriting our history. I see myself as one of the people who are contributing to rewriting that history all over again. Because as you rightfully say, Diane, there are other people telling our stories. Why am I reading about Samuel Haynes from a Jamaican sociologist? Cedric Grant wrote the book, The Making of British Honduras. He was a Guyanese. And we have not had, apart from Asa Schumer's 13 chapters and so forth, we had the great work that Spear was bringing out with Borland and all of them that was doing this. But when I was coming up as a student in high school and primary school, I was never really taught basically who I am, my leaders, my people, apart from just the very political people that was there who wanted themselves to be held up.
Well, we certainly learned European history very, very well, didn't we?
Indeed, but
yes.
at SJC Sixth Form, they were doing British English history,
yes.
but we never learned Belizean history per se.
Indeed.
And so I see myself as one of those people who are beginning to rewrite Belizean history all over again, and it has to be done because our young people, they don't really know who they really are. And if they don't know who they are, they can't, and if they don't know their past, there's no way they can understand their present. They're just lost in this mix that we have, this whole situation with the gangs and with these young men who are just caught up and totally don't know anything about the greatness that they come from, the greatness of the people. And it is like there is something they're trying to wipe that out, trying to let them not know what it is, right? Or who they were. Isaiah Martha Harambee, we can go back into as I gave you, Ernest Lyons, Belizean, who became my students were doing at EPR, these were the notes that they were getting in their social studies. Who are your people? The syllabus is asking you, who are your leaders? Not Bob Marley, but who are your indigenous Belizean leaders? Those people from the past that you stand on their shoulders today. You got to know your history. Apart from know how you govern, your constitution. Where do you find yourself in it? Do you understand it? And so forth, in terms of being able to present a sort of a defense and a resistance against any external sort of brainwash education that may come to try to make you something that you're really not. I think it's really what Spear started as calling popular education.
Yes.
My principal said to me, well, I have to come and look for you to teach at that classroom because the Ministry of Education have to approve that. So Mr. Jennity came and he saw it and he was like, how long are you going to be here with us, right?
I think if we go back to Sidney Satchell, for instance, I think that was, for me, one of the joys of working under his principalship, because I think he respected and appreciated, people like us who were not simply there towing, the status quo line, and then you ended up with some people who, as you said, became suspicious of you when you tried to step outside of that particular box, Bilal, it's time for us to actually take a break. So I want you to kind of hold the thought that you have going on in your head right now, while I invite our viewers to stay with us while we take this short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Dialogue with the Diaspora. I'm speaking tonight with Bilal Morris, a broadcast journalist living in the United States. Bilal, I want to take you on this journey prior to internet and social media and all the new information and communication technologies. When you started to do this work, how did you get your message out there? How did you collect your stories? What were your production means and ways even? Yeah.
Very much so. Before the arrival of social media, Diane, you had to do everything the hard way, the difficult way. Journalism was one that you had to hit the beat. You had to get out there and you had to go and find the stories. When I wrote Edit Belizean Focus, I basically had an old typewriter, one of the old manual typewriters, right? And that was where I actually typed up most of the stories on. There was no laptop computer, and it was just the manual method and laying it out manually and taking it to a copy shop and have them print it up. And after we are done with that, you have to then hit the beat. You got to hit the pavement, get out there. And I would go around in the small Belizean spots and venues and just pass them out manually and sell them. We would put them in the Belizean restaurants. Los Angeles had a lot of Belizean restaurants and businesses. So that was fortunate that we had outlets. And so we would put the newspapers in there, and that's how they would sell. But apart from that, I remember being at KPFK. I come out of the tape thing. There was no digital technology where you can now sit here and on Zoom, right? There was no Zoom. And it was radio. It was not even video. So I remember had to go and with just the little microphone and go collect the sound, do the interview, and get the interview done and bring the interview in and take it to KPFK, go inside the studio, use tape. It was analog technology. It was not digital, all tape. And cut tape and put that whole thing together and get it out and ready for the Friday morning broadcast of Belize Caribbean Pulse. It was hard work. And I was not even hosting the show. I was actually behind the scene doing the production, making sure that the itinerary, the production, I was producing it from behind the scene. And I took all of that in terms of my personal work, because if you, like my friend Michael Hyde would say, which was a student of yours, and he's a Grammy Award winner, taught me my audio, all my digital audio, but we both came out of sound, analog. And he would say, what we have over this new generation today, that we learned it the hard way, right? We learned it when it was analog technology. And so the digital becomes so easy in terms of that. But you have to have spent a tremendous amount of time. It just does not come that way. I'm talking about 30 years of work that now have had me to be able to do something now personally that I will be able to use as a contribution to my country and people. But it was work that entailed a lot of sacrifice. A lot of times I was up producing a show and didn't get to sleep and had to go to work the next day. The reason why I could not host Belize Caribbean Pulse is because I had a job, I had a family. You had to take care of your family. And I was juxtaposing and juggling these things. And sometimes I never slept because the show is Friday morning, and I have to make sure that I produce by Thursday night. I have to get the production into the hands of the hosts. And so it was a lot of sacrifice. And you had to be personally committed to what you want to do. A lot of people used to look at me and say, how do you do that? You're not even getting any pay for that. I would not do that for no country and people. That's not, but for me, it was just a labor of love. It was something you have to love it. You have to be able to love what you're doing. That was the kind of sacrifice, personal commitment, and labor of love that made you become the sort of professional, an artist in terms of what you're doing today. What goes into this work. And today, for me, Belizean Legends is basically myself and my son on camera You know, the work entails is very easy in that I have already invested all the hard work over 30 years in terms of developing my craft, developing myself personally as a broadcast journalist, as a documentarian, um, in terms of how to store these things, how to preserve these things, how to take pictures out of newspapers. You know, I would go to Belizeans living in the United States and give me all the newspapers you have. And they would like, what? You really, I have a whole lot. And they would give me them. And I would meticulously go through these newspapers, find these stories from the 60s and the 70s. This is Billboard, a Mandela Reporter, Belize Times, and just meticulously go and find these stories that I love. These stories, I love this, the work. I love the research to go in there and actually find these things that are relevant, that our people have forgotten about, and to bring them now with the arrival of social media, to put them up there and to also document there. I do not only depend on Facebook and social media for my work, I actually document these things.
How important were these interviews that you did with Belizean personalities and especially our politicians? How important were these interviews, these stories to our Belizean diaspora?
Yes. These stories, Diane, were very, very educational. Um, they were not just an interview to put a spotlight or to give someone some of these political figures some kind of prominence, but these people were relaying history that when they are gone, and if you have not documented that, they take all of that with them. And I think this is one of the problems our country is facing: oral history, in documenting people before they have left us or passed on. And so these interviews were not only a means of entertainment and to provide people with information, but they were also very educational. They're archived. And they were, what I have done is that I have taken a lot of this information and I have sort of shared with academia, University of Belize, high schools. I started by first teaching with this information at EP-ARC, using it as my textbook. Because when George Caleb Price speaks, or when Manuel Escobar speaks, or when Said Musa speaks, or when Dean Barros speaks, or any political figure for that matter, they are given a tremendous amount of history there. That if that is not documented, I don't know if we can go back today and have in the National Archives of Belize actually find audio of old 1950s and 60s speeches by our political figures of the day, 1960s speeches. Can our students of history of high school, I remember taking my students to the Leo Bradley Library, and we couldn't find some of the things we needed for the research. It is very important that our government of the day and our cultural institutions invest heavily in documenting history, because it is educational. If we don't have it, then the next generation that is coming up will not have anything that they will be able to go find in terms of doing their work, their educational exercises. And so it enriches the consciousness, and it broadens the knowledge base. It's about knowledge. And you have to be knowledgeable of what your past is, about your leaders and about your people, your culture, your music, your history, your sports. And if we can find people, we need a Belizean Sports Hall of Fame. Because who can walk into Belize today and go find something on Jacinto Tashkiteras, the legendary Belizean footballer that passed away? Who can go in there and find history on the Queen's Park Rangers player and so forth, or the San Joaquin football player, Malanga, Main, right? If you're an athlete, right? You cannot go and find these things.
Yeah.
And so this is what I have invested in terms of, I can encourage others to do this because it is knowledge, Diane. It is, we just look at them as a political figure speaking or interviewing someone, but it's, and then you just pass that away and you don't document that or put that somewhere, archive that. No, you have to archive that and put that in there for future generations who will be coming up, present and future, they'll be able to go in and to hear what they had to say.
You've interviewed all these people. Surely some of them are perhaps more memorable than others. Maybe you might want to share with us some of those memorable interviews and why perhaps they are more memorable to you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's just so many of them, but I I loved an interview I did recently with a Belizean that lived in Diaspora, whatever way we want to call, say that word, Lex Samuels. It was an interview that I was searching for years because when I lived in Chicago in 1981, I was told about him by another Belizean who became a doctor, Dr. Calvin Flowers. And they were two St. Michael's College students. And the journey about Calvin Flowers, I wrote about him because he was such a phenomenal, such outstanding Belizean in terms of his quest and his struggle to become a doctor. And he brought the side of me, Lennox Samuels, because he knew that I love journalism. And I met this guy in 1981 when he had already obtained his education and he was doing big things. And a couple of years ago in 2017, I was fortunate to bring him in the studio and he spoke about the world and as a broadcast journalist and what he did and his work and how he came back to Belize to actually become a diplomat. But the powers that be did not allow him to do that. So he just returned back to the United States. But his broad knowledge of the world and the stories he covered, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. And people, Belizeans, did not know about this man. And I was able to help him with his itinerary and visiting Belize one day. And he was able to get his voice out. But through that interview, which has been documented and which was one of the most dearest interviews to me, I was able to tell the story of a Belizean who did some dynamic things. Politically, the interview that I really had enjoyed that I have done was interviews that I have done with Belizean political figures from Dean Oliver Barrow to George Caleb Price that came through the KPFK experience, right? Those are memorable interviews that when I go back and look at them, I can see so much history there. But most of all, the interviews that are dearest to me that I've done also is the one on Ambassador Adalbert Tucker, right? That we recently honored him the other day. It was like you're sitting as a person interviewing this person, but you're like a student. You're the journalist and you're interviewing this figure, this dynamic Belizean figure, but it's like you are a student itself because he's bringing to you a body of knowledge that you have never known of. The same thing with Lennox Samuels. We know that our political figures in the country, we know a lot of them, and sometimes we know a lot of what they are going to say and so on. But it's the people outside of that political spectrum that are politically active that you enjoy. They do the best interviews for you because they were able to show you on the other side what is happening on the other side of those people who are reacting, who are sort of acting within that confine of that political party or that political leader or that government itself. And I think those are the best interviews that I have done. The Belizeans who are operating on the periphery of the whole political spectrum those people who are not the prime ministers and the ministers of this and the ministers of that, but those people who are operating on the periphery. As I said, the most enjoyable one that I've ever had in my entire life was the one, an ambassador, Adalbert Tucker.
The Belizean American diaspora in LA is probably the largest. Uh, what are the possibilities there for greater collaboration among the diaspora to keep the community connected to Belize?
Oh wow! As you know, Diane, the struggle, the struggle for the development to have Belizeans play a meaningful participation in the development of Belize have been one of the struggles of Breda from the 1980s, in that we had heard Minister Golson's call to have Belizeans be more meaningful, more constructive in the development of the country. The whole aspect of their constitutional citizenship, right? Where we feel that Belizeans in the diaspora that have done so much, as we have rightfully spoke about here on this show today, that they are not given their due respect and appreciation for the work that they have done, though they are natural born Belizeans. And we had very much begin a process in Breda to push what they call the Seventh Amendment, where Belizeans abroad were sort of denied of their constitutional right to hold political office and to participate in Belizean elections, either by proxy and so forth. We were an ardent presenters of that. And the government of Said Musa had brought it up and they had voted against that amendment. And in that way, Belizeans abroad had lost a lot of their constitutional right. And the constitutional right that they had was that being natural born Belizeans, they could not hold political office because they hold another citizenship. We have seen countries, and we have learned from Ambassador Adalbert Tucker, who was another ardent presenter of this through the top 10 programs and stuff like that, that there are countries like Mexico and all over that does not pay attention to the fact that Belizeans hold another, that they are citizens that is hold another citizenship, but that they give them the same equal right to even become, to hold political office in their country. I think our Constitution, the constitutional amendment is very biased, and because it allows Guatemalans, and the Constitution of the country made it very clear that no one, no country, no people whose country claim the country of Belize can hold or have Belizean citizenship. And no offense against the indigenous peoples of Guatemala, the beautiful people of Guatemala, and so forth. It's not them, but it's their governments who have acted in this way. But the Guatemalans, by their coming to Belize and becoming Belizean citizens, are having Belizean citizenship, whereas the Belizean abroad, his citizenship has been, his rights to his citizenship has been violated through that amendment. And I believe that when Prime Minister Dean Barrow brought it up, to resurrect the Seventh Amendment, there was a great outcry against it at Parish Hall, where people actually went and said, no, Belizeans abroad cannot have that right that we have here. They left, they went abroad. They are not here, and they hold another citizenship too? No. And while at the same time, the whole hypocrisy about the whole matter was that the governments of the day, both the People's United Party and the United Democratic Party, were allowing Guatemalans whose country claimed the country of Belize, allowing them to have citizenship rights. This is, I think, until that is the ultimate ease for the sort of bringing Belizeans abroad closer to their home country in terms of development. That in itself, whichever government will be able to, we tried with Prime Minister Barrow, and we had a discussion with him in the late Hubert Pipersberg and Ariel Lightfoot, but he outrightly says no. It's not. They knock it down when I try to bring it. I'm not going to go back and try to do that anymore. But the collaboration with Belizeans at home and Belizeans abroad continue, Diane, beautifully, regardless of what that political
Good.
part. I just wanted to bring that in.
No, and I
So,
think it's
right?
important that you
Yeah.
it's important that you have drawn our audience's attention to it. I mean, there's quite a lot in what you just recently said. That one needs to unpack as a people, as a country, to talk about these things, because if you look at the issue of dual citizenship, which many Belizeans have living in the United States, some may argue that they're not American citizens because they want to be American citizens, but for many of them, living in the United States basically has allowed them to open more doors for themselves to be able to live there as a human being, with rights and opportunities and so forth. And you put that against the issue that even though constitutionally we are saying that if you are an enemy of our country, then you have no right to become a citizen of our country, but yet we allow those people to simply denounce their Guatemalan citizenship to become a Belizean. And so there's quite a lot in there that unfortunately our show does not really allow us to get into it. I mean, it's a critical conversation that requires its own attention. In fact, not even just one show, probably a whole series. Because one of the things with us is that we do not talk enough about a lot of these very important issues. We take something and we talk about it maybe in a talk show here and there, and then we drop it by the wayside, but we don't have the real dialogue about these important issues. So unfortunately, we can't talk about it here, but it is certainly something to be flagged. What I'd like to ask you as we wind down our show for the night is to tell us what's in the future for Bilal.
Very much I want to continue, Diane, with my journey as a documentarian. I always have asked myself, what is it that you can, I like to quote John F. Kennedy's, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And so I'm embarking on this journey as a documentarian in terms of compiling Belizean history. I have 2 books that I'm about to publish. One it's a Belizean short stories. I've written a lot of short stories about Belizean nostalgia, which is so dear to my heart, about the past, the Belize that was. And that is a book that I am publishing and hope that I could get it into the schools for Belizean kids, students to read, for literature. And also I'm publishing the book on BREDA, the Belizean Rural Economic Development of Agriculture through Alliance, on our 30 years of work as a grassroots Belizean organization in Los Angeles. And of course, hopefully, in my final years, retiring in Belize and continue to make my my contribution to people and country. So that's what Bilal has for the future, and those are some of the things that I am embarked on.
Sounds good. So, any final words before we leave?
Yeah, I want to send greetings to my Belizean people. I want to thank you, Diane, and Colorblind Television for inviting me to come up here and to tell my story about a Belizean in diaspora. And as my book will be called, the Diaspora Blues. My book is going to be called Diaspora Blues. And I want to thank all the Belizean people I have documented their stories, the Belizeans from all walks of life. And I just want to say to my people, I love you. And, you know, we hope that in the near future that we can do great things and big things and put Belize on the pedestal that it rightfully belongs. Thank you so
Well,
much.
on that note, we do have to call it a wrap. Bilal, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I thoroughly enjoyed our dialogue, and I commend you for all that you are doing to preserve our culture and to keep the Belizean connection strong. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you very much.
Viewers, we now take a short pause for a final ad break. Viewers, thank you for joining us tonight for Dialogue with the Diaspora. As expected, we had another dynamic and interesting conversation with an outstanding guest whose wealth of knowledge and dedication to cultural preservation is already benefiting us. Bilal Morris is a Belizean nationalist who has kept true to his Belizean roots. I continue to be impressed and proud of our Belizean brothers and sisters who are making their mark in the diaspora. Our time is up for tonight, but we will be back again next Thursday at 7 p.m. right here on CBTV and on Facebook on Colorblind's page. Do enjoy the remainder of your night. Good night and take care.